from the prestigious institute, the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. And besides working with adults, couples, and families, she's also published her research work on various aspects of marital therapy, including marital quality, in scientific journals and books. She's also received several awards for her work and is a real storehouse of knowledge and experience in this really important area. And with that, I think I'd like to invite Dr. Shruti to share some of her thoughts and experiences with us today and help us understand really about how to build healthy relationships, which is a very important aspect of everyone's lives. So thank you very much, Dr. Shruti, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayashree, for such a warm welcome and introduction. Good evening, everybody. The topic for today is I versus us and healthy relationships, right? And I think healthy relationships is something that we all perhaps long for. We do have relationships in our life, most of us, and many of us have positive experiences of relationship. And sometimes the easiest way to perhaps identify what a healthy relationship looks like is a relationship in which one feels happy and in which one feels satisfied. So that's one of the simplest ways in which we can identify a healthy relationship. So when I'm going to talk about relationships or healthy relationships today, I'm not keeping a specific relationship in mind. I'm keeping the generalities of what a healthy relationship looks like, irrespective of the kind of relationship. It may be between friends, between romantic partners, between family members. It could be any, right? So when we're talking about healthy relationships, then there are some fundamentals that we can look at. And sometimes our feelings becomes our best guide to identify that. So healthy relationships are usually ones where a person feels safe. And when I say safe, I mean safe in different ways. In terms of, does one feel safe in being able to be who one is, to live out their sense of self, to live out their sense of identity? Does one feel safe enough to be able to talk about their feelings and their thoughts without having to worry about, am I going to be judged? Am I going to be mocked? Is somebody going to use that and later get back at me for having said what I shared? Okay. Can I feel that what I share is going to remain in the relationship? It is not going to be shared. My trust is going to be maintained. I'm not going to be betrayed on that. So there is a fundamental sense of safety, of comfort that is present in a healthy relationship. It allows oneself to be oneself without the fear of being oneself. A healthy relationship is one where we experience trust, support, comfort. We feel emotionally held. We feel heard. We feel that we are respected and valued. And in a healthy relationship, mind you, when we say relationship, it's not one-sided. It's not just about what I receive. It's also about whether I'm able to offer the same to the other. So the healthy relationship is not, do I feel it's healthy for me? Do both people in that relationship feel that this is something that is good, healthy for both of us? In a healthy relationship, there is a space to talk about things a person disagrees on with the other. A person is not mocked or shamed for who one is. We can have difficult conversations. We can have deep conversations. And if we disagree, we can solve that disagreement without hurting the other person. A healthy relationship is one which meets our needs. And those needs can be many. They can be intellectual, They can be emotional. In a romantic relationship, they're sexual. They may be financial or practical. So a healthy relationship, by and large, has the potential of meeting needs. It doesn't mean that it's going to meet 100% the needs of each individual in that relationship, but overall, it has the potential for meeting our needs. And it also has the potential of giving to the other. So it's not just about taking, it's about giving as well. So in a healthy relationship, most individuals are able to find a way to meet their needs and have the needs of the other met through them. They're able to arrive at a middle ground if there is a disagreement. And one person is not left feeling, either sidelined or used or perhaps abandoned. So there is a certain mutuality there. Right? So by and large, if I was to look at healthy relationships, this is how I would define it. Okay. Another way of looking at it is what is unhealthy. And if something unhealthy is present, obviously it means it's not healthy. Right? But can we identify unhealthy?
Right.
Sometimes the unhealthy is glaring. Okay. And it may be glaring or extreme, perhaps, in the form of things like abuse. It may be verbal, it may be physical, it may be sexual. So presence of some tangibly or easily visible unhealthy aspects can give us a feeling that this relationship of ours is not healthy.
Right.
And something opposite is healthier. Sometimes
can I pause you there? Can I pause you there for 1 minute and just because we've got a number of people who have tuned in today to understand how to really understand what is a healthy relationship and identify if they're in a relationship which isn't healthy. And thank you for really explaining in such a lot of detail about what really is a healthy relationship and helping us understand that particularly the us aspect is very important. That sense of a space where you feel that comfort. And I just wanted to, again, highlight that for people who've joined in today, because I think those are two really very important aspects which you've brought out. I also just want to invite everyone who's in the audience to share their questions with us, which we will take up through the course of today. And also to let you know that we are recording this session in case you would like to share this with other people later on. It will be available on our YouTube channel. It's also being live streamed there in case you have anyone who you'd like to invite to join us right now for this session. Please do that. So if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and you can also either ask them anonymously or you can post them to everyone, depending on your comfort level. But with that, Dr. Shruti, you were explaining something really important to us. You were helping us understand what are the signs of an unhealthy relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So please, could you tell us some more?
Okay. So there can be various signs of an unhealthy relationship. One, I was talking about one extreme where there is abuse which is present, right? But unhealthy signs can be present in a less extreme form as well. They can be more subtle, they can be more persistent, and sometimes it takes a while for us to be able to pick up something as unhealthy. Sometimes it's harder because we're so used to something that we're not even aware that this is something unhealthy. So if one was to look at what are some of the unhealthy things, maybe one could start with looking at communication. How is the communication between people, right? If there is a need to avoid communication, okay, I don't feel like talking, I don't feel like sharing. So those are some of the things that could indicate to one that there's something happening here that is not healthy. Because if I'm in a relationship with that person and I'm not feeling like talking to them, there's something amiss. Right? So communication is one of the ways we can identify something being unhealthy. If the communication becomes hurtful, disrespectful, if the communication becomes a way of attacking the other or blaming the other, or sometimes a very natural way of communicating is we make comparisons. We don't talk about what we need directly, but how we garb our needs can be in the form of comparisons. You know, they went out, or they do this, rather than saying, I'd like this, right? So sometimes, even though we are expressing what we need, the way in which we express it may not be clear. It may not be direct. It's not very specific. I'm comparing, or I'm giving the other as an example of what I want without clearly stating what I want. Or
that's a really important thing you mentioned, Dr. Shruti, because I think just that use of they do this and that comparison in rather than saying this is what I really want is I think one of the very common challenges that we see in communication styles when we work with different people. And it sounds very simple, but it's a very important thing that one can really change, and that can make a huge difference in your relationships.
I agree, because these are some things we are so subtle, we do not recognize that this is something unhealthy. Because what it lands up doing is that the other is not sure. Okay, are you telling me about what they do? Or am I supposed to pick up something about what you want and what we need to do? Right? So it's very confusing, right? And these are the places which open up spaces for misunderstandings and disappointments to be created in relationships. Right? If, apart from comparing, suppose I'm using a way of expressing myself, which is in the form of a complaint. Okay, you never do this. How many times I have told you, yet you don't, right? So it is a way of stating what I want, but through a complaint and through an attack on the other person, right? So here, when I'm attacking the other person and complaining about them, I'm expressing a disappointment in them. Sometimes it can land up pulling a response where the other feels attacked. They feel the need to justify themselves. They find themselves getting defensive. And then when they get defensive, it starts a very unhealthy cycle of communication between people.
Right.
They want to attack back, or they keep quiet because they feel attacked when the other goes on the offensive. So it again sets up something unhealthy. Sometimes our way of asking what we need is a criticism of the other. You never do this. You are like this. So the sense of self, which is supposed to feel very safe, comforted, validated in a relationship, it gets attacked by this way of expressing ourselves.
Right.
So communication, which is affirming, communication which has broadly more positive feelings being expressed vis-a-vis the negative feelings being expressed. It's not as if we communicate only positive feelings. We have both. But where does the balance tilt to? Does it tilt to more positive, or does it tilt to more negative? That will fundamentally make you feel that this is healthy or more unhealthy.
Right. You spoke about different things that are often styles of communication in relationships that are very unhealthy. And I know one of the questions that a lot of people had when they, who've joined us for today's session is how can we really improve our communication skills so that we can become closer in a relationship? What advice would you have on that?
Okay. So I'm going to break it down into some broad categories, right? I think if we need to improve our communication, first we need to make time for it. Right? So that exclusive, undivided time becomes very essential. it can't be improved on the fly.
Right.
So that time is essential. And then let's say that there are some basics which are needed, which means that before I even say listen well, I have to attend to the other talking to me. So it's about, do I have distractors like a cell phone on or a television on? Or am I able to give undivided attention to the person who wants to communicate with me? Right? So what is the setting like? That setting is very, very important because it gives a message to the other that what I have to say, the other is respecting it enough and considers it important enough to be able to give it that undivided time and attention. Okay. The other thing, apart from the setting, is a lot of our communication is not verbal. It's also non-verbal. It's through our body language. It's through our eye contact, right? So it helps if you're able to look at the person whom you're talking to. Simple encouragers like nodding our heads, saying phrases like, They are ways of letting the other person know in simple manner that they are heard, that somebody is there who's not just lost in space, they're tuned into you. Okay. Being able to emote as the other person speaks, having a tone of voice, which I think that's one of the first things that we all respond to positively. A harsh, negative tone of voice vis-a-vis a calmer, softer, soothing one. We all respond to that. Babies respond to that. Adults respond to that, right? Then is in terms of verbally, how we can communicate better, right? Some of the examples that I was sharing earlier, they were like, they do this, or you, okay? So one of the simplest ways of making the conversation or communication more constructive is take away the you word. Use the I word. I feel this. I think this. When this happens, or when this is going on, I am feeling this. Right? So that's one of the simplest ways to convert criticism or a blame or a complaint into an expression of your thought, feeling, or an expectation or a need. Sometimes we don't immediately get what the other person is saying. And it's perfectly okay. And it helps that you ask and you respond to what the other is bringing in. So it's like one can paraphrase. You said this. Is this what you mean? Or I understood this. Is that what you were trying to share with me? So some bit of paraphrasing helps the other person know that they're listened to. They'll also help them know whether you got them, and it will give them an opportunity to correct it if you haven't got them. Can act like an opener for deeper conversations.
Right. And one of the
able
things
to identify if the feeling that is being expressed. Okay, and being able to say it. Okay, so I hear that you feel bad about it. You feel hurt about it. This makes you feel upset. It's going to go a long way in helping the other person know you're tuned in. And it makes it easier to offer comfort or support or empathy.
So really connecting at an emotional level.
Sorry?
So really connecting with the other person at a more emotional level is important as well. That actually leads me, we have a question, Dr. Shruti, from someone who's listening in, and they're asking, can two people having similar emotional issues be healthy partners?
Okay. Okay, let's put it this way. If the similar issue, say, for example, is the two people don't know how to cope with hurts. Is it a tough emotion to cope with? Yes. Okay. And if both of them, when they are hurt, they don't know what to do with it, maybe they get angry or they don't talk to each other. So if they have similar issues, it's not as if they cannot be together.
Right.
Can be together provided both of them are invested in their own growth, one. Second, if they're committed to taking charge of their sense of self enough to ensure that the us that they are creating is important to them and they're willing to do what it'll take to make that us healthier. So having similar issues isn't a challenge. Yes, sometimes when it becomes like, can the blind lead the blind? Okay. No, sometimes we struggle with the same things, but are we willing to turn, maybe not just to each other to learn, but are we willing to open ourselves up to growth and learning through inputs that we get in our lives? And they can be our friends, they can be our family, they can be professional. So having same emotional issues is not a challenge as long as one is invested in one's growth and is committed to the growth of the us, whatever that us is.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting that, that there's such a lot of emphasis you're putting on the us part of the relationship. But one of the things that a lot of people often ask, and we had a couple of questions around this also, was how do you build these healthy boundaries in relationships? You know, where is that boundary? How do you draw that line when you're talking about the us?
Okay. I think maybe where I'll start an answer to this conversation is what boundaries are, because how we define boundaries many a times decides how we feel about them. The common misunderstanding people have is that boundaries are some things, they're like walls. You draw walls, and then they feel that it's not okay to draw those walls. Okay. Boundaries are not walls, first of all. Because yes, if we are close to somebody, we do not want to draw a wall, right? But boundaries, one can look at it like they're basically lines. Okay? These are lines that define what I like, what I don't like, what I'm comfortable with, what I'm not comfortable with. These are lines that define how respect, perhaps, or commitment, perhaps, is constructed in that particular relationship, right? So these are lines. And I think many a times, because people have a thought that boundaries are walls, or even if they are lines, people at times hesitate in drawing healthy boundaries. Healthy relationships have healthy boundaries. The whole idea of a boundary is to preserve your sense of self and to be able to create a respectful relationship with the other. Sometimes we don't try and, put boundaries in place because we are scared. We are scared we will upset the other. We are scared the other will get angry with us. We are scared that they will reject us. They will move away from us. And sometimes we are scared because we think that we have to be nice to people. And it's not nice if you're not making them happy. If you're saying a no, it makes them unhappy, and that's not a nice thing to do. So sometimes our own ideas and our beliefs about what is okay, what is good, what is not good, how one should be, can prevent a person from setting these healthy boundaries. Okay. So some of the ways in which we can go about setting these boundaries is first by being clear in our minds. What is the boundary that I want to set? If I don't know where I want to draw the line and with whom I want to draw it, it's hard to convey the line. Right? So if I know that this is the line, for example, I can say that, okay, when I'm in my room and I'm doing this, I would not like you to come in. Or when my room door is closed, please knock before you come. to something as simple and basic as that, to something larger, where if one is clear about the boundary, one is clear about who one is drawing with, where one can express that boundary calmly, without a fight, clearly, and in terms of, I would say, kindly, without hurting the other, without pushing the other, without making them feel abandoned and lonely. That would be a healthier way to create boundaries.
Thank you for highlighting all these different ways in which we can actually start thinking about creating healthy boundaries, which is also really important for maintaining that healthy us in a relationship. We have a couple of questions which have come up in the chat, and I thought maybe we could just quickly go over to some of those. One of the questions is, how do we build a healthy relationship with ourselves?
Okay. I think that's an important question, because sometimes in nurturing relationships, one might forget to nurture oneself. So, one of the important ways in which one can create a healthy relationship with oneself is first by looking at, what do I feel about myself? Is what I feel about myself positive? Or there are times I feel inadequate or unworthy, not good enough. Right? So, what is my primary feeling towards me? If my primary feeling towards me is positive, then it's about nurturing that positive relationship, doing things that maybe allow your sense of self to grow, picking up activities which are satisfying, picking up maybe things like hobbies, maybe taking time out for oneself, being able to offer as much care to oneself as one might to the other, being accepting and not judgmental of oneself. Those could be some of the broad ways in which one can begin with that. But if my feeling towards myself is not a positive one, then it helps to be able to examine and, if required, take the help of a professional to be able to examine why I feel what I feel towards myself. Because sometimes we have learned to feel a certain way, or certain experiences that we have had have managed to create a feeling about us that is not positive. So being able to unpack that feeling and then be able to build from ground up, that helps.
Right, that's really important advice, Dr. Shruti. We have another question, which is is an extrovert personality good for relationships, in particular marriage?
As in, can extrovert people? I didn't get the question.
I think perhaps people, people are interested in trying to understand whether, if you're very, very extrovert, maybe there are some concerns around whether, being an extrovert is potentially problematic when building a strong sense of a relationship, or I don't know, in terms of communication, how would those aspects, how would an extrovert, what tips would you have for an extroverted personality in building a relationship?
Do not think that either extroverts or introverts, they're not contraindicators, or it's not as if they cannot create relationships, right? But I think it would be more in terms of the specific behaviors. And in this context, if we're talking about extroverts, then we're looking at certain specific behaviors which can be hurtful to the other. They may be expressions of oneself, but they can be hurtful to the relationship one is trying to create. So in the extrovert, or let's say in being an extrovert. Let's say, for example, if it's easy for me to be able to express myself, or I can get along with people easily, right? Are certain lines being crossed? Okay. So in being able to be expressive, am I ridiculing of the other? Okay. That's a line that is getting crossed and that is unhealthy. For some people, let's say in a romantic relationship specifically, if I can talk to multiple people and socially, I'm comfortable and confident. Right? Am I talking to a lot of people and in a way that is actually challenging the fidelity or the security or the safety of my relationship with my romantic partner, right? Or in being extrovert, am I trying to be who I am? I'm being loud, but I'm landing up being offensive to the other. Is my expression, let's say, of anger, disappointment in a manner that is very, very overpowering or overwhelming for the other? So it's not that whether extroverts can have a healthy relationship or not, or can they be in it. It's about certain traits which, when taken to the extreme and when they become hurtful to the other, yes, they are unhelpful.
So I think as you were highlighting, it's so important to look at if you have a particular type of personality, and as you're mentioning, that could be for introverts, extroverts, how the way you're expressing yourself and your behaviors might actually be impacting your relationship. And that's really a starting point for making changes to build a healthier relationship and really look at some of the things that you were talking about. So that's really very helpful advice. There's another question that we have. If needs are not being met, even after communicating with empathy, and this is now beginning to interfere with your sense of self in a relationship, how does one navigate this?
Okay. I'm going to put it in two brackets. One bracket is where the needs are not being met, right? Yes, if they are being sensitively and communicated in a manner that is healthy, that's a very positive thing. Secondly, some disappointments in a relationship are natural. Not every need of each of those two people in a relationship is met. So we may communicate in the best way possible. However, it's not a guarantee that each person's every need is met. So can we handle disappointments? Is a skill emotional skill we have to grow. When two individuals are finding a middle ground, some needs of one will be met, some needs of the other will be met, and each one of them may have some needs which are not met. Right? And being able to accept that and adapt to that is important. Now coming to the aspect that you brought up, that when sometimes the needs, healthy needs of one's sense of self are not being met. Okay. So if there are some healthy needs of one's sense of self, and that sense of self is getting invalidated, even when the need is reasonable, it is healthy, then one needs to examine, is there respect for my sense of self? Is it that I am the only one, for example, who is giving a lot, but I'm not mutually receiving something in the relationship? Is my sense of self diminishing? Right? So moments when we have these choices, where our sense of self is getting compromised or dismissed or diminished, then we need to reevaluate the relationship. And we need to be able to communicate to the other, okay, in a manner that helps a person constructively look at the unmet need. Okay. Sometimes the other may be unknowingly be dismissive of the sense of self of the other. One may not know how much it means to the other.
Right.
If it is known and yet it is getting diminished or dismissed, then it is important to be able to take charge of that eroding of that sense of self, and seeking help, professional help, would be useful. Okay.
Absolutely.
And at one's own level, it's important to be able to talk about the feeling that one might have of either being tired or at times maybe being used, maybe at times being dismissed or invalidated. That's where one can begin that conversation.
So it's really also again about understanding that point at which a person is feeling invalidated, and really communicating again with your partner or the person who's in this relationship, and again really highlighting the importance of communication, I guess, again. So there's a couple of questions more that we've received. Someone wants to know whether it's possible to change one's personality because they feel it's difficult to get a suitable partner for marriage. And I'm wondering whether this is really a question about changing one's personality, or is there something more to this that this person could think about, Dr. Shruti?
Okay. I don't think that, okay, I'm going to look at it from two lenses. One, can we change ourselves? Okay. Can we grow? Yes, we can. We always can make the choice of growing who we are as individuals in a manner that helps us move in the direction of being more healthy and more complete individuals. Okay. So can we transform certain aspects and grow those aspects in us? Yes, we can. However, we can't change fundamentally who we are as individuals. There is a certain core to each one of us that defines our sense of individuality and who we are. Right? So that is going to remain. But yes, what we can do is look at these aspects that define the core of us. We can preserve the aspects that are healthy, and the aspects of the core of us which become unhealthy, we can grow in them. So that's about us as individuals. Now coming to the other part where it's like, can I change who I am to be able to find somebody to be with? I think that would be a very, very unhealthy thing to do. Because one's fundamental belief about oneself is that who I am is not worthy enough or not okay enough to be able to be in a relationship with the other. And one is setting a very, very, I would say, dangerous trend of saying, I will change who I am to be with you. And saying, I will lose who I am in order to have you in my life. Right? And that won't be unhealthy. So what works is, maybe you look at what is making you feel that who I am is not worthy of being with somebody or being loved. And I think that might be an area to grow in.
That's a really important, I think, starting point that you highlighted is really in terms of looking inwards at what you might, how you're feeling when you're thinking about being in a relationship. And maybe you could get some signs about what to change from there. And as you were mentioning earlier, Dr. Shruti, that if there are people who are feeling stuck in these situations, is it important to seek help from a professional?
It definitely does help. And maybe what one can begin to do by oneself is, we all get stuck if we are doing the same thing over and over again. Right? So being able to look at, what am I doing? Doing the same thing and expecting a different result doesn't happen. So it helps that if I want to be unstuck, can I look at me and see what can I do different? This is what I usually do. This is what I usually say. This is how I usually respond. Okay. What can I do different this time around?
Mm.
would be a good place to begin to get unstuck about some simpler things, right? But when it comes to some larger things, okay, yes, taking professional help would be useful. And sometimes there are some things that one may not immediately get unstuck from. Okay. So let's say if two individuals are stuck in the argument where what they want are two polar opposites, and neither of them is willing to move. Okay. Neither of them is willing to either understand why the other wants what they want, and neither is the other willing to let go of what they want even a little bit to meet the other midway. Right? So, yes, those are moments of being stuck which are harder to resolve, but one needs to understand, if we want two polar opposite things, each person has a reason for wanting what they want, and each person has a reason of holding their ground. So, a way to get unstuck around it is first understand why are the two of us holding two polar opposite grounds and we're getting stuck to it. And if you begin the conversation there, sometimes it can loosen up that stuckness to be able to find some window to break through.
So is this really about how do we solve conflicts within relationships?
Yeah, it's about solving conflicts. It's also about, solving unmet needs at times, both.
Right. So we have another question. You've been talking a lot about the we in a relationship, and someone has asked, how do we bring the other partner to respect the us aspect of a relationship?
Okay. I think first one would need to look at why is the other not as invested or committed to the us, right? Sometimes we start as us, right?
Right.
And then the journeys we take can decide whether we commit more or we begin to commit less.
Mm.
So sometimes these journeys have a very important role to play as to why the other is not that invested in the us. Okay. Sometimes the other is just not interested to invest in the us right from the beginning.
Mm.
And then that's something that doesn't materialize and follow through. But if you've taken a journey where you started from that investment in the us and how it's transformed over time and experiences, is that today one person is less invested in the us, then it's important to be able to look at that journey in its entirety. So it's like saying if two people started taking that journey together and one of them is now taking a separate one or lagging behind or moving forward, then what has happened that they can't walk together? So looking at what has happened that they can't walk together can help a person then look at, okay, what can we do? Or why has this person lost the faith or the belief or the commitment to walk together? And then perhaps it can give a clue to, can we bring that back? Rather than you are not walking together.
And I think that, and again, that's a really important aspect that I've been hearing you talk a lot about through today's session is really, if we have a question about why the other, in our relationship is not responding to us in a certain way, a starting point is to really look within and try and see how we're feeling, how we're expressing ourselves, and what does this really tell us about ourselves as an indicator of maybe some starting points for change. And that actually brings us on to another question which has come up in more in so how does someone who's been married for a very long time, in maybe 10 years of marriage, how do you gain support and empathy after these being in a relationship for a very long period of time?
Okay. I think the duration of the relationship becomes immaterial, right? Because empathy is something that, yeah, we can give to each other. But if that empathy is absent from the outset, then one needs to look at, is this a relationship that is healthy for me? Is it emotionally giving me what I want? Okay. And if that empathy is absent, there could be a backstory if it has eroded. Okay. Or one can look at what has happened that today the other may not feel my feelings. Okay. Am I communicating my feelings adequately? Am I communicating my feelings in a healthy way? Can I do something to make the other person understand my feelings a little bit more? Or at times, is my expectation that the other get exactly, and unless they get me exactly, they don't get me at all. So one can look at both, what one can do different to be able to make it easier for the other to give us empathy, right? Sometimes we are not able to empathize because we don't understand. We don't know the shoes the other is in. Or I may expect that you automatically know the shoes that I'm in without telling you, these are my shoes and this is where they pinch. Right? Or it could be that the person in front of me emotionally may not have that ability. They may not have that ability to give that empathy to me.
Right.
Or maybe overall, across relationships, it may be hard for that person to be able to communicate empathy. Right? It's not something they may not want to give, but maybe it's something they don't know how to. Right? So depending upon where is it that lack or less empathy is coming from, which factors contributing, one can work from there. Sometimes there may be more than one thing contributing to it. So it helps to be able to identify that.
Right, right. And I think we have a couple of minutes left. So in case anyone has questions for Dr. Shruti, please do share them in the chat. We have another question. In modern relationships, couples believe much more in equity of gender. And in your experience, what do you have, what advice do you have for these couples?
Okay, as in, should they ask for it? This a little bit more.
Well, I think maybe whoever has posted that can just add a little more to their question so that Dr. Shruti can answer it more cohesively. But maybe just to add to that, there's another question, it might be related, but there is so that there are more female than male participants in the session today. And there's a question about, is that an indication that the onus of a harmonious relationship is a gendered concept? That's a
I hope
interesting question.
And if it is a concept, then we'll try very hard to bust it because it isn't gendered.
In your experience, would you like to shed some light on how you can encourage more men to start thinking about this? Because we also hear this a lot when we work with women, in therapy, that my husband, my partner, is not interested to look at our relationship. What advice do you have for women in this scenario? And what advice do you have for men in general, given this previous question that we had?
Okay. In a relationship, perhaps what I can say is that two people are either happy together or they're unhappy together. So for the men who may not want to maybe look at their relationship, it helps to look at the fact that when two people are unhappy together, it impacts them as much as it impacts the other. And one does have an onus and a responsibility for one's own happiness. This is not about, taking more responsibility and, it's the woman in the relationship who's supposed to take more onus. Well, one has the right to feel happy in one's relationship and one can do something about it, gender irrespective. So if one is willing to want to work towards their happiness and take responsibility for that, it helps.
So often we get a lot of queries at Samvedna. So Samvedna provides mental health support for adults, and a lot of times we get queries from people saying that someone is willing to come for therapy, but their partner is not willing. And what would you recommend for them?
Okay. I would actually look at why they're not willing to come. Sometimes it may be social reasons. Okay. Men do not talk about feelings. We don't need a professional help to talk about our relationship. If we talk about our relationship, it is not okay. It breaks the secrecy pact. You don't talk about it outside of family, right? Or it may be, I believe I'm the right one, the other is the wrong one. Okay. So the hesitations or the reasons one may have that keep one away, or sometimes it may be fear because they've never experienced the process before. I may feel that, okay, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be blamed. I'm going to be told, you do this wrong. So a therapist and a judge, they're two different things. A therapist is going to be invested in helping you move towards something healthy if you're committed to that. So there can be a lot of myths about therapy. And it helps to be able to suggest that, they can experience one session and then take a call.
I think that really highlights how this isn't a gendered issue. It's really about wanting to work on yourself and your relationship. And as you were saying, really about the investment that you have in your relationship.
Right? But sometimes we do know that despite trying level best, either by the one partner or by therapists, sometimes we may not have the other still agreeing to come in. The one who's willing to work. And we look at, okay, what is the growth that this particular person can do without overburdening this person who's willing to commit more and work more on their relationship.
Right. So thank you for highlighting both those aspects are really important. The self-growth when you're in a relationship, as well as working on the relationship itself. Both of these are really important aspects. I think we're very close to time, but we may be able to get another couple of quick questions. We have, so someone has been asking that if there's a constant feeling between partners that they don't understand each other, even after being married for a very long time, what would you recommend to create a more harmonious relationship in this circumstance?
Okay. I think perhaps if I was to oversimplify, because there can be many factors which have led to a lack of understanding between two people. But the journey to sort of healing it starts with communication. It's not as if the couples would not have, or the individuals would not have spoken about that issue before. Because when we don't, or rather when we have a misunderstanding, we are likely to have tried every possible way of trying to get ourselves across. but sometimes having ideas of how we can get ourselves across in a healthy manner and break the impasse that we may have in our communication can lead to building that understanding back up again.
That's really, really important advice. I think quickly, I'd just like to ask you, Dr. Shruti, if there's any quick tips, very general. I know this is a broad area. I mean, like, relationships are incredibly complicated, but if you were to give some quick tips, what would they be? What tips kya hai? What, for the larger
Okay, then I would say make time, make effort, communicate in a healthy way. Whatever's positive, find a way of communicating that. It's easier to communicate what's not okay. But if we can add acknowledgement and appreciation, it definitely helps. Being able to offer empathy, comfort, support, encouragement, and respecting who the other is, I think would be some basic starting points.
With that, thank you very much, Dr. Shruti, for your time and really taking us through what we mean by a relationship, what we mean by healthy relationships, some important things to think about when we look at our own relationships, really the us in our relationships, how to communicate better, build healthier boundaries, how to resolve conflicts, and think about all these different things. And you've really given us a lot of inputs for starting points if we're feeling a little stuck in our relationships, about things that we can do to change this. And you've also highlighted how important that if we're stuck in a relationship, it is to seek help. And we know that, sometimes there are misconceptions around, visiting a psychologist or meeting with a mental health professional, but professional help can really be important sometimes. So it's important to keep that in mind. I just wanted to mention that Samvedna is really working to help people feel better about themselves with their mental health and well-being. And we're focusing a lot on self-care, understanding how to help individuals identify if they're stressed out for whatever reasons. It could be relationships can sometimes become a huge source of stress. So we have a tool called MAP. It's a simple self-assessment tool just to assess your well-being with a couple of quick questions. And we invite all those who are listening in today to take a look at that and start out on a self-care journey. So with that, I think I'd just again like to thank Dr. Shruti for all your time and all your expertise and sharing that with us and all the participants today. And thank you to everyone who's joined us for being so active in the session and making this a really valuable learning for all of us. So thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.